there is a version of you that exists inside your own head. It has a personality you could describe, habits you'd claim as your own, values you'd say you live by, strengths you're proud of, and weaknesses you've made peace with. If someone asked you now to describe yourself in 5 sentences, this is the person you'd describe. Not perfectly. You'd hedge a little, admit a few flaws for credibility, but broadly, this is the picture. And then there is the version of you that actually walks through the world, the one those closest to you know, the one that makes the choices you make when nobody is watching, the one that reacts before you've had time to compose yourself, the one that leaves rooms and leaves a wake of impressions you will never get to see. Baltasar Gracián, the Spanish Jesuit priest born in Aragon in 1601, whose 1647 masterwork, The Art of Worldly Wisdom, collected 300 aphorisms distilled from a lifetime of watching people rise and fall, believed the distance between those two versions is the single most important measurement any person can take of themselves. He believed that most of what we call wisdom, most of what we call growth, most of what we call becoming a better person is really one thing dressed in different clothes, closing that gap. Here is where he begins. Aphorism 69. Know yourself in talents and capacity, in judgment and inclination. You cannot master yourself if you do not know yourself. There are mirrors for the face, but none for the mind. Let careful thought about yourself serve in their place. Notice what he's saying and what he's not saying. He's not saying that self-knowledge is nice to have, or a good exercise, or a spiritual pursuit. He's saying it is prior. It comes before mastery, before wisdom, before any of the outward capacities he spends the rest of the book describing. You cannot govern what you do not first see. And the reason so few people ever really see themselves is that there are no mirrors for the mind. You have to build one yourself, and that turns out to be much harder than it sounds. Turn 1. Why self-knowledge is so much harder than it sounds. If you asked most people if they know themselves, they'd say yes, not with total confidence. Most people are humble enough to hedge. But the general answer would be yes, of course. Who else would they know if not themselves? You've lived inside your own head your entire life. You've had every one of your own experiences. You've made every one of your own decisions. If knowing yourself were simply a matter of exposure, no one would know anything more thoroughly. And yet, Gracián observed something that anyone who has ever tried to actually see themselves clearly will recognize. The person we know ourselves to be is almost never the person we actually are, not because we're lying to ourselves in any dramatic way, but because the very equipment we would use to see ourselves is the same equipment we use to protect ourselves. The eye that would examine the self is also the eye that flinches from what it finds. And so, over years, without ever noticing it happen, we develop a version of ourselves that we can live with, a version smoothed out in 100 small places, softened in the corners where the truth would sting. You believe you are patient because you can recall the times you were patient. You cannot recall with the same vividness the times you were not. Those memories have been quietly filed elsewhere, or rewritten as reasonable exceptions, or simply forgotten. You believe you are generous because you notice yourself giving. You do not notice, with the same attention, the moments when you calculated whether the giving was worth it. This is not a moral failure. It is the ordinary working of the human mind. It is what all of us do, all of the time, unless something interrupts the pattern. Gracián's point is that only deliberate examination interrupts it, not casual reflection, not the occasional moment of self-awareness after something goes wrong, something more systematic, something more honest, something closer to what he called careful thought about yourself, that phrase from Aphorism 69, meaning attention paid on purpose, with the intent to see rather than to reassure. And here's the hard part. The person who most needs to do this work is often the last person who thinks they need to. The people we all know who most obviously lack self-knowledge are almost never the ones asking whether they might. That asymmetry is the trap. Which means the fact that you are willing to ponder this question at all is a rare thing. Turn 2. The 4 blind spots. Across his 300 aphorisms, Gracián circles the same 4 areas where he thought self-knowledge most reliably failed. Not vices exactly, blind spots. Places where people consistently misjudge themselves in the same direction, in ways that shape the rest of their lives. The first is talent. Most people hold either an inflated or a diminished view of what they are actually good at. The inflated view is more common in youth and in the confident. The diminished view is more common in the diligent and the anxious. Both are wrong, and both cost. The person who overestimates their talent invests in the wrong things and is surprised by the results. The person who underestimates never puts the real thing into play and lives a smaller life than they were built for. Gracián's counsel is simple and unforgiving. Know precisely what you can do, not more and not less. Test it against reality often enough that the picture stays accurate. The second is judgment. This is a subtler one. Most people believe they see the world clearly, but everyone has characteristic distortions, patterns in how they read situations that they cannot see because they're inside the pattern. Some people consistently misread motives as more hostile than they are. Others consistently misread them as more benign. Some are quick to see risk. Others are slow. The problem isn't the distortion itself. Every person has some. The problem is not knowing which one of these distortions of the internal mirror are yours. Knowing it doesn't remove it, but it lets you correct for it, the way a sailor corrects for a wind he cannot see. The third is inclination, what actually pulls you, not what should pull you according to what you've been taught to value, not what pulls you in theory or what pulls you on a good day. What actually pulls you when you're tired and no one is watching and you have 3 hours to do whatever you want. That answer, Gracián believed, is the truest thing about you, and it is often quite different from the answer you would give if asked in polite company. The fourth is tolerance, meaning what you can actually endure and what breaks you. Most people don't know until they're tested, and by then, the knowledge arrives too late to have shaped the choices that led to the test. Gracián wanted his readers to know their tolerances in advance, not to avoid difficulty, but so that when they chose difficulty, they were choosing it with their eyes open. Talent, judgment, inclination, tolerance. Those four keep returning across the aphorisms because all four are places where the picture inside your head is unusually likely to differ from the reality outside it, and where the cost of not knowing the difference is unusually high. Turn 3. The mirror problem. Why the people around you can't fix this for you. One reasonable response to everything so far is, fine, but I don't need to figure this out alone. The people who know me will tell me. My partner will tell me. My close friends will tell me. My therapist will tell me. I am surrounded by mirrors. Gracián was skeptical of this, and for good reason. He observed that the people closest to you are almost never in a position to give you clean feedback about who you are, not because they don't love you, often precisely because they do. The people who love you have a stake in the version of you that they know. They've built a relationship with that version. They've made accommodations for its edges, telling you something that would require them to renegotiate that relationship is costly for them in ways they may not even consciously calculate, so they don't. They tell you the smaller truths, the ones that don't require anyone to change. They keep the larger ones to themselves. The people around you who are not your loved ones, meanwhile, are unreliable in the opposite direction. Their feedback is skewed by their own agenda. A rival will tell you what makes you smaller. A stranger will tell you what makes them look kind. Neither reflects you accurately. The truest mirrors, Gracián thought, are rare. A small number of people in most lives who both know you well and are, for one reason or another, willing to tell you things that cost them something to say. Cultivate those relationships. Ask those people directly about what you can't see from your own vantage point. And then, this is the harder part, listen without flinching when they answer. But even the asking is trickier than it sounds. Most of us, when we ask for honest feedback, are not actually asking for honest feedback. We're asking for reassurance, dressed up in the language of self-improvement. And the people we ask usually know this. They can feel it in the way the question is worded, in the tone in which it lands, in what we do with their answer once we have it. If you have ever asked someone a real question about yourself and then argued with their answer, you have taught them, without meaning to, not to answer honestly next time, and they won't. This is how people who genuinely want to know themselves end up surrounded by mirrors that no longer reflect anything. When you ask in a way that makes it safe for the other person to answer honestly, which means, above all, receiving their answer without defense, without correction, and without explaining yourself. Not for the whole rest of your life. You're allowed to disagree eventually, but not in the moment they've told you. In that moment, the only appropriate response is, "Thank you. This is helpful." Anything else trains them, quietly and permanently, not to tell you the next truth. And the next one might have been the one that mattered. But even those relationships are supplements, not substitutes. The mirror Gracián points at, in the end, is the one you build inside yourself, because you are the only person present for every moment of your life, and you are the only person who ever sees the gap between what you intended and what you actually did. Turn 4. What actually works. The practice of self-audit. Scattered across the aphorisms is a fairly clear set of practices, worth gathering into something usable. The first is what Gracián called reviewing the day, a habit that predates him by centuries, going back to Marcus Aurelius, 121 to 180 AD, and the Stoic tradition further back still. But Gracián adapts the practice to his own purposes. Where the Stoics reviewed the day to measure themselves against virtue, Gracián reviews it to measure himself against reality. At the end of each day, before sleep, look back. Not to punish yourself, that is a different exercise and mostly a useless one, but to notice. Where today did my actions produce the result I expected, and where did they not? Where was I surprised by my own reaction? What did today reveal about me that I didn't already know? The point isn't to reach conclusions. The point is to keep the attention alive, night after night, so that the gap becomes visible instead of invisible. The second is what he calls the trial of prosperity. Watch yourself, he says, especially when things are going well, because prosperity is when we tell ourselves the truest and least examined stories about who we are. Most people can look honestly at themselves in a crisis. Almost no one can look honestly at themselves in comfort. If you want to know your character, study yourself when nothing is testing you. The person you are then is closer to the person you actually are than the person you become under pressure. The third is the discipline of watching your own repetitions. Everyone has patterns, situations that keep showing up, conflicts that keep having the same shape, mistakes that rhyme. The instinct is to explain each one as an isolated event, driven by the specific people involved. Gracián's counsel is the opposite. If a pattern keeps repeating, the common variable is you. That doesn't mean you're at fault. Sometimes patterns show up because of what you rightly value or what you rightly refuse. But the pattern is telling you something, and the person willing to read it honestly learns things about themselves that no external mirror could ever show. Turn 5. What changes when the gap starts to close? This is the part to be careful about, because it would be easy to promise too much here, and Gracián himself never did. He didn't promise that self-knowledge would make you happier. Sometimes in the short term, it does the opposite. Seeing yourself clearly, especially for the first time, can be uncomfortable in ways that a smooth self-image is not. He didn't promise it would make you more successful. It might, but it might also make you turn down opportunities that a less clear-eyed version of you would have chased. What he did promise is this: self-knowledge is the ground on which every other capacity is built. Everything Gracián writes about, subtle strength, the art of timing, selective revelation, the reading of people, the discipline of silence. Every one of those depends on knowing yourself first, because you cannot pause your impulses if you cannot see them coming. You cannot time your actions if you cannot see the pattern in your own timing. You cannot protect what is fragile in you if you don't know what is fragile in you. Every wisdom he offers rests on this foundation. Without it, they are techniques. With it, they are practices that actually take root. And there is one thing more. When the gap between who you are and who you think you are begins to close, other people start to notice. Not because you tell them, because the version of you they encounter starts to match the version you claim to be. That congruence is what people mean, without ever quite naming it, when they say someone has weight or presence or gravity. It is the felt sense of a person whose inside and outside are pointed in the same direction, and it is impossible to fake for long. Which is why, in Gracián's view, it was the one form of authority that could never be lost, because it was the one form that had actually been earned. There's also something practical worth naming. As the gap closes, your decisions get easier. Not because the decisions themselves get simpler, they don't, but because a person who knows themselves stops having to run every choice through the filter of who they're trying to appear to be. That filter, when you can't see it, quietly rewrites every decision it touches. You think you're weighing a job offer on its merits. You're actually weighing it on how the version of you inside your head thinks it should be weighed. You think you're choosing a partner freely. You're partly choosing the person who confirms the story you've been telling yourself about who you deserve. Remove the filter, and the choices don't get easier because they matter less. They get easier because you're finally the one making them. Gracián watched this play out across 4 decades of court life. The people who moved through difficult decisions with what looked like ease were almost never the ones who had somehow acquired a magic clarity. They were the ones who had done the slower, quieter work of knowing themselves well enough that the decisions no longer required them to consult a version of themselves that wasn't real. Something to try, starting tonight if you can. Before sleep, take 5 minutes, not more, not less, and ask 3 questions. 1. Where today did my actions produce the result I expected? 2. Where did they not? And 3. What does the gap between those two tell me about myself that I didn't already know? Don't write elaborate answers. Don't try to solve anything. Just look at the answers honestly and let them sit. Do this for 1 week, 7 nights, no more, and see what starts to become visible that wasn't before. 5 minutes, 3 questions, 7 nights. It sounds small because it is. It also happens to be the practice Gracián thought was the single highest leverage habit a serious person could build. Good night, and be gentle with what you find when you start to look.
Night Wisdom Radio.